The honourable member for Vermilion-Lloydminster.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, whether you love the Fraser Institute or you hate it, it's hard to argue with their motto, if it matters, measure it. That's why it was so stunning last month in estimates when the tourism minister stated, and I quote, "It is not useful to do an economic impact assessment on an annual basis. The relatively small changes in overall tourism revenues on a year-to-year basis do not have a significant impact on economic measures such as jobs, companies supported, and taxes." Wow. Minister, if you measure what matters, but you're not measuring tourism, are you saying that tourism doesn't matter?
Minister of Culture and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that tourism makes life better for Albertans by bringing people to our province, creating good-paying jobs, and diversifying our economy. Mr. Speaker, the issue that the member is raising is something that he himself is familiar with, an issue that we've had for a very long time, and that's the methodology that's being used by Stats Canada is not the most reliable one. And so we're looking for ways in order to increase the transparency and find a way to measure all of these things in forms that we can actually use to make informed decisions. So, thank you. That's pretty good.
First supplemental.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given that noted management guru Peter Drucker stated what gets measured gets managed, and given that managing the tourism industry demands measurement of economic activity, jobs created, businesses impacted, and tax revenues generated, and given that the tourism minister is responsible for providing leadership and vision for Alberta's tourism industry, and given that this tourism minister intends to fly the tourism plane in the fog and the dark with no chart, compass, altimeter, or instruments of any kind, to the minister, how are you going to provide strategic leadership to the tourism industry when you can't even be sure which direction it is headed?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of flights, we can just announce that we just had a new flight from Mexico directly into Calgary, in addition to the ones we have. So obviously, Mr. Speaker, I know a thing or two about flights. What I can tell the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, is that when we look at tourism, we know that it actually diversifies our economy. It supports good-paying jobs. We're very happy about what we've seen. We're going to continue doing what we're doing right now because it's actually working. Thank you.
Honourable member, second supplemental.
You say it's working, you have no clue whether it is or not. Given that this government is constantly telling Albertans how tourism is a key component of economic diversification, we just heard it, and given that Drs. Trevor Toome and Robert Mansell of the U of C School of Public Policy recently published a research paper entitled "If It Matters, Measure It, Unpacking Diversification in Canada," and given that the tourism minister has decided measuring the impact of tourism is not useful to the minister, you've stopped making measurements, you've stopped collecting data, yet you still claim that tourism is growing and diversifying the economy. You just did, without any metrics. How are you going to prove it?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. As I explained to the member during the estimates, we are looking at the methodology to actually determine the best way forward. There is no consensus between the different jurisdictions on how to measure tourism, because somebody landing in Vancouver who makes their way into Calgary, for example, is counted as a tourist in Vancouver, but not so in Calgary because they're traveling by land. So there are disparities in the way in which you measure these things, and so we're trying to find a way to come up with a methodology that makes sense, Mr. Speaker. However, we're very proud of the work we're doing in this province to support good-paying jobs.
Thank you.